Hi everyone, I'm David Pounds, Chair of the Art Department at Palm Beach Atlantic University. In this video, I'll be demonstrating techniques to take advantage of the power of the brushes palette and several ways to take standard typefaces and turn them into one-of-a-kind logotypes. The inspiration for this project came from a Tom Whalen poster for the classic Disney movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The whole thing is impressive, but I was especially interested in the way that he incorporated the giant squid's tentacles as a unifying design element. I thought I might show you how he may have done them. After I create the tentacles, I'll show you how I created this custom lettering and then touch on a technique for adding texture to your illustrations. If you're following along and you want your layout to match mine, I'm working in the Essentials Classic workspace. You can get to that by going to Window, Workspace. I've got Whalen's piece on its own layer, so the first thing I want to do is turn that off and begin working on a new blank layer. Next, I want to create the first tentacle. It's easiest to do this as a horizontal element and then use brushes to curve it. I'm doing a rectangle about the same width and length I want the finished tentacle to be. Using the white selection tool, highlight just the right two corner points. When I select the scale tool, you can see where the 2 points will shrink towards when I click and drag inwards. Now I hit Command Y on a Mac or Control Y on a PC to switch to the outline view and zoom in for some detail work. Click and drag to create a curve point and continue around to form the end of the tentacle. I want the alignment to be exact, so I'm zooming way in here. So the beginning and ending points of this shape sit right on the sides of the rectangle, and the curve handles line up with the angle of those sides as well. I want a seamless transition from straight line to curved line. Switch to the black selection tool, select both shapes, then use the Pathfinder tool to merge these shapes into one shape. One of the nice things about the Essentials Classic layout is that if I want easy access to a tool that's not in this right side display, I can customize it by opening the Pathfinder palette from the window menu, then grab the Name tab and drag it over to this stack of palettes. Now that I have both shapes selected, I can use the white button of the Pathfinder palette to join these two shapes into just one shape. The end looks a little stubby, so I'll use the white selection tool to adjust that a bit. I want to add some stylized suckers along the length of the tentacle, so I'll start with a small rectangle and use the white selection tool and the scale tool to make the bottom side smaller. Notice that the bottom control points are solid and the top two are hollow. That means that only the bottom two that are solid will be affected. With the scale tool, I click and push in. I move the sucker to overlap with the tentacle, then rotate the shape so it's at the same angle. Using the black selection tool, I hold down the Option key and drag to create a copy at the opposite end of the tentacle. I'm thinking I don't want all the suckers to be the same size, so I'm going to zoom in on the right sucker, grab a corner, hold down the Shift key to make the shape proportionally smaller, and then drag in. The best way to create a series of intermediate shapes would be the Blend tool. Select the first one, hold down the Shift key to add the second shape to the selection, then go to Object, Blend, Blend Options. Switch from smooth color to specified steps. 8 is the default, and we'll go with that to start. Click OK, then repeat the process to get back to the palette to choose Blend Make. The intermediate steps are not visible in the outline view, but switching to the preview allows us to see them. If I don't like the number of steps, I can go back to Object, Blend, Blend Options, turn on the preview and change the number to, let's say, 12, then hit the Tab key on my keyboard to see the new number of steps. This seems to be too many. Let's try maybe 6 instead, and click OK. Now, for the next thing that I want to do, having it be adjustable isn't going to work for me. So I need the intermediate shapes to be actual shapes. So what I'm going to do while this is selected is go up to Object and say Expand. Click OK. All right, so now you can see these in the wireframe. This is going to allow me to do some things that I couldn't do otherwise. Now, I don't have the option now of changing the numbers anymore. I've sort of set this in stone. But what this will allow me to do, see right now these are separate shapes. So what this will allow me to do is come in and select all of these and then use my Pathfinder again. See, I told you I was going to use this quite a bit, and do this. So now this is one shape, all right? Now, you might be thinking, well, that's great. You have this sort of stylized looking tentacle, but it's not curved. Yeah, that's true. And this is the next step that's going to take care of this. What I'm going to do is go ahead and just switch this around. So now it's got a black fill with no stroke. And then I'm going to open up my brushes palette. And what I'll do is I will just grab this and I will drag it over in here and then let go. And I want this to be an art brush. And click OK. When I click OK, this gets me another little dialog box. So I'm going to call this tentacle, let's call this down. And what that means is that the suckers are going to be down. What you see here, this is the start of the path, and this would be the end of the path. So this is directional. Let's do this as a scale proportionally. I'll do this a couple of different ways so that you can see what it looks like each way. So let's click OK. Let's go ahead and do another one. So I'm going to go ahead and Option drag to make another one, and then I'm going to use my Reflect tool to flip this up. And so we'll just do that. And I'm going to make this into a brush as well. Okay, so drag this one over again just like before, and we want this to be an art brush, and I'm going to call this tentacle up. Okay, so the way that this works is any path that I create, I can have this brush be put along this path, so something like that. All right, now notice it distorts it a little bit, which is fine. I can come in here just like a pen path, and however I want to move this around, I can do that, okay? Now you'll also notice that if I really do something like that, see, the brush is not going to be able to make that turn. So there's a limit to what I can do with this. I might look at this and say, okay, I don't want the suckers to be down, I want them to be up, in which case I would use this one instead. Okay, so you can kind of see how this works. I might come back and use these later, so I don't want to delete them. So I'm just going to select them both and drag them off the screen here. And let's talk a little bit now about how to make nice smooth transitions with these. I'm drawing this line with the pen tool, which I might like or I might not. Another way to go would be to construct the line rather than draw it. I'll start with the ellipse tool rather than the pen tool. I'm holding down the Shift key as I draw to make a perfect circle. Notice these 4 control points. If I'm working with ovals and I delete sections, I can connect 2 ovals into one path, and as long as I join them at the connection points, the curve transition will always be nice and smooth. With the white selection tool, I highlight one of these control points and delete it, which eliminates half the circle. Now I make a smaller circle and delete half of it. With the black selection tool, I move the smaller circle into a position where it touches the end point of the larger circle. I zoom in and change to the outline view to make sure the 2 points are aligned to each other. Once they're as close together as I can make them, I'll use the white selection tool to select both points, then go to Object, Path, Average. Illustrator will then position both points right on top of each other. It now looks like one point, but there are actually still 2 of them. To weld them into one point, I go back to Object, Path, Join. The two half circles are now one continuous line. Back in preview mode, I can then assign a brush to the path. This is fine if I want the tentacle to curl out from the center, but what if I want the tentacle to start on the outside and curl in? To change the orientation, I double-click on the brush in the palette, which gets me back into the brush options. By clicking the opposite direction arrow, then clicking OK, a dialog box appears asking if I want to apply this change to the selected path, which I do. The result being the direction the tentacle brush path takes is turned around. When making paths with the pen tool, the beginning of the brush is always the first point you click on. When the lines are constructed rather than drawn, the beginning and ending of the path is less certain. Let's create another path using the same construction method, but with ovals this time instead of perfect circles. Keep in mind that if I make the curve too tight, it will distort the end of the brush path. I can keep adjusting these lines until I like them. This is how I created these shapes. They're constructed, but I played with how they interacted with one another until I got a result I was happy with. Let's move on now, and I'll show you how I created this inset texture. Here are two constructed lines with a tentacle brush applied to them. I could probably use the pen tool to draw the insets, but that would take a lot of time. Switching to the outline view shows that the original paths are still there. By copying these lines, Command or Control C, then using Command F to paste in front, which puts the copy directly on top of the original, I can then make a new layer named Line Storage, drag to position this new layer to the bottom of the stack, then grab this little red dot, which represents everything that is currently selected on the working layer, and drag it onto the line storage layer. So now I have one copy on this layer and a second one on this layer. This gives me a pristine set of lines if I ever need to come back to them. I'm going to do the same copy paste in front that I did before, but this time I'm going to leave both sets of lines on the same layer. If I take the brush stroke off the top set of lines and give them a color, you can better see what's happening. The plain lines at the ends of the tentacles are not quite curving correctly, so I'm going to adjust them manually. By using the pen tool to click on an already existing path, I'm adding a new control point. This then allows me to use the white selection tool to adjust the end of the path to better match the end of the tentacle. I'll then do the same thing to the other end point. I don't like the look of these flat end caps, so I'll use the stroke palette, showing more options by clicking here, then choosing this middle cap option to round off these blunt ends. I've changed the thickness of the lines to 5 points, but I also want to make them less regular. To do that, I go up to Effect, Distort and Transform, and finally, Roughen. By clicking Preview, I can see that the default settings look like this. And that's obviously too crazy, and it has spikes I don't want, so I'm going to adjust it to change the points to smooth, then try different size settings so that the peaks and valleys are not quite so extreme. After some experimenting, I've settled on 0.2%. I can add even more detail by upping the number of peaks and valleys right here. It's still rough, but not too rough. If I go into the outline mode and don't see the roughened lines, that means I can still go back in and make changes if I want to. The way to do that is to go to Window, Appearance, and choose Roughen from the list, which gets me back to the original Roughen Options palette. I wouldn't go back to Window to Effect because that would add a new distortion onto the original distortion. At this point, there are some things I want to do to both sets of lines, but I can't do them while they're in this current form. With both sets selected, I go to Object, Expand Appearance. The lines look the same, but a quick peek into the outline view shows that they are now a shape made up of many control points rather than a path with a brush attribute. This inside path needs a couple of more expansions to get to the same form as the tentacles. Now that the inside line is a shape, I can zoom in and adjust some of these points so that the end of the line is more tapered and less bulbous. We want the program to do as much for us as we can, but sometimes some manual tweaking is required. The disadvantage of this being a shape rather than a line is that I can't go back to change the curvature of the inset because it's now made up of hundreds of control points rather than less than a dozen control points. However, remember when I made a copy of the original lines and transferred them to the line storage layer? Here are my original paths. If I really think I need to, I can adjust these, then go through the roughen steps to get back to the place I am now with a newly curved inset. Before we move on to start talking about type manipulation, I wanted to show you another way to do this. As I was working on this illustration, I had a bunch of different variations, and you can see them up here, and I would mess with different layouts and things. Originally, I was thinking about, instead of having that highlight in the middle, I was thinking about doing some sort of Tom Whalen style shading on this. And so I had a look like this, and I was doing something different with the tentacles, a little bit different layout. So let's talk about that just a little bit before we move on, and let me show you how that works. Okay, what you're seeing here is two copies of the original pen path. One of them that has the brush applied and then expanded, and the other one left as just the path. So what I'm going to need to do is make a few adjustments here at the end because this doesn't really work for me. Okay, so let's bring this around. Oh, let's say something like that. And notice, this is real important, that this path has to extend past this. So that means that I'm also going to have to adjust this one. And rather than try and adjust it, I think what I'm going to do is just use my pen tool and click right in here and then extend it. So now that I've done that, I'm going to come around and join these two together to make one complete shape. All right. All right, so just so that you can kind of get an idea how this is working, I'm going to give this a different fill color. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and select both of these, and then I'm going to go to this tool right here, which is the Shape Builder tool. All right, so you can see as I move over this that these different sections are selected. So right now this has a plus symbol. If I hold down the Option key, it has a minus symbol. You see right there by the cursor. So this is now highlighted, so if I click on it, it's going to delete it. So what I wind up with is something that looks like this. And so this is going to be a separate shape. I can give it whatever color I want. All right. So that would be one way of doing this. It's more of a stylized thing. So it's a little bit more complex if I wanted to make this a bit more realistic. So let's say if the light is coming from this direction, this would be in highlight, this would be in shadow, but at a certain point, probably about right in here, this inside part would be catching the light, and this part right here would be in shadow. So this isn't going to quite work for me the way that I want it to. So let me show you a little bit different way that we can do that. Okay, so this is a modified version of the technique that I just showed you. So the light's kind of coming from this direction, so you've got highlights here, and then on the inside it's in shadow, and then the light comes across and hits this inside of the loop, and now that's in highlight, and this area over here is in shadow. So let's take a look and see how we would accomplish that. So what I've done here is off camera, I created a pen path that zigzags back and forth like this. Notice that, and this is an important thing, that the end of the path has to go outside of these shapes right here. So then what I'm going to do with my black selection tool is I'm going to select this shape, and this path, and then I'm going to go to the Pathfinder, and I'm going to choose the divide feature right here, like so. Notice that the extension of the lines disappear, and you say, well, so what? That looks kind of stupid. Okay, But what's happening is if I go in now and I select this with my white selection tool, see this is now a separate shape that I can then come in and say, all right, well let's make that bit right over there. We're going to get our white selection tool and click right there to select that color, and then I can drag it over here to make it look like that. And then I can come in and I can select this area right here and say, all right, let's make that part black. So I wind up with this sort of back and forth way of getting the transition from this green onto the black. So we wind up with this sort of transition like this. So that's how you can do that. It's a lot more work than the way that I decided to go, but just in case you're wondering how that technique works, that's how it can be done. Okay, before I move on and start talking about type, I want to finish this little bit of information right in here about how I did this. I added this texture on top just to give it a little bit more visual interest. So there's several different ways to do it, but the way that I'm going to show you goes like this. So first thing, I'm going to select the shape, and I'm going to go up to Window and choose Appearance. Right here is this, and I'm going to choose Add New Fill. So it's automatically going to fill it up with black, but that's not what I want. So I'm going to click this little down right here, and I'm not seeing what I want to see over here. I want to look at the textures, so I'm going to go to the swatch library and choose Patterns, and then I'm going to choose Basic Graphics and then Textures. So these are the ones that are available to me. So I'm going to do this one right here. It shows up like this, and it's actually sitting on top. And the nice thing about this is you can actually put in as many fills as you want on top of each other, which is kind of cool. I've decided though that it's a little bit harsh with the black, so I'm going to come over here and go to Transparency and then knock down that fill pattern to make it a little bit less. You can see how the gray is a little bit washed out, so if I change the normal to multiply, you can see how it looks a little bit richer. This is what it looks like with multiply. This is what it would look like with normal. See, it's a little bit washed out, so I think that multiply works better. This video is getting a little bit on the long side, so I think I will stop here. Make sure and view my second video where I go into how I did the type for this piece. Thanks for watching.